Chapter 12. Iyagils were the most enjoyable balls in Moscow. So said the mothers as they watched their young people executing their newly learned steps, and so said the youths and maidens themselves as they danced till they were ready to drop, and so said the grown-up young men and women who came to these balls with an air of condescension and found them most enjoyable. That year 2 marriages had come of these balls. The 2 pretty young princesses Gorchakov met suitors there and were married, and so further increased the fame of these dances. What distinguished them from others was the absence of host or hostess and the presence of the good-natured Iyagil, flying about like a feather and bowing according to the rules of his art, as he collected the tickets from all his visitors. There was the fact that only those came who wished to dance and amuse themselves as girls of 13 and 14 do who are wearing long dresses for the first time. With scarcely any exceptions they all were, or seemed to be, pretty, so rapturous were their smiles and so sparkling their eyes. Sometimes the best of the pupils, of whom Natasha, who was exceptionally graceful, was first, even danced the pas de châle, but at this last ball only the Écossaise, the Anglaise, and the mazurka, which was just coming into fashion, were danced. Iyagil had taken a ballroom in Bezukhev's house, and the ball, as everyone said, was a great success. There were many pretty girls, and the Rostov girls were among the prettiest. They were both particularly happy and gay. That evening, proud of Dólokhov's proposal, her refusal, and her explanation with Nicholas, Sonia twirled about before she left home so that the maid could hardly get her hair plaited, and she was transparently radiant with impulsive joy. Natasha, no less proud of her first long dress and of being at a real ball, was even happier. They were both dressed in white muslin with pink ribbons. Natasha fell in love the very moment she entered the ballroom. She was not in love with anyone in particular, but with everyone. Whatever person she happened to look at she was in love with for that moment. "Oh, how delightful it is," she kept saying, running up to Sonia. Nicholas and Denisov were walking up and down, looking with kindly patronage at the dancers. "How sweet she is, she will be a real beauty," said Denisov. "Who?" "Countess Natasha," answered Denisov. "And how she dances!" "What grace," he said again after a pause. "Who are you talking about?" "About your sister," ejaculated Denisov testily. Rostov smiled. "My dear Count, you were one of my best pupils, you must dance," said little Iyagil coming up to Nicholas. "Look how many charming young ladies," he turned with the same request to Denisov, who was also a former pupil of his. "No, my dear fellow, I'll be a wallflower," said Denisov. "Don't you recollect what bad use I made of your lessons?" "Oh no," said Iyagil, hastening to reassure him. "You were only inattentive, but you had talent. Oh yes, you had talent." The band struck up the newly introduced mazurka. Nicholas could not refuse Iyagil and asked Sonia to dance. Denisov sat down by the old ladies and, leaning on his saber and beating time with his foot, told them something funny and kept them amused, while he watched the young people dancing. Iyagil with Natasha, his pride and his best pupil, were the first couple. Noiselessly, skillfully stepping with his little feet in low shoes, Iyagil flew first across the hall with Natasha, who, though shy, went on carefully executing her steps. Denisov did not take his eyes off her and beat time with his saber in a way that clearly indicated that if he was not dancing it was because he would not and not because he could not. In the middle of a figure he beckoned to Rostov, who was passing. "This is not at all the thing," he said. "What sort of Polish mazurka is this? But she does dance splendidly." Knowing that Denisov had a reputation even in Poland for the masterly way in which he danced the mazurka, Nicholas ran up to Natasha. "Go and choose Denisov. He is a real dancer, a wonder," he said. When it came to Natasha's turn to choose a partner, she rose and, tripping rapidly across in her little shoes trimmed with bows, ran timidly to the corner where Denisov sat. She saw that everybody was looking at her and waiting. Nicholas saw that Denisov was refusing, though he smiled delightedly. He ran up to them. "Please, Vasily Dmitrich," Natasha was saying, "do come." "Oh no, let me off, Countess," Denisov replied. "Now then, Vaska," said Nicholas. They coax me as if I were Vaska the cat, said Denisov jokingly. I'll sing for you a whole evening, said Natasha. Oh, the Feiwi. She can do anything with me, said Denisov, and he unhooked his saber. He came out from behind the chairs, clasped his partner's hand firmly, threw back his head, and advanced his foot, waiting for the beat. Only on horseback and in the mazurka was Denisov's short stature not noticeable, and he looked the fine fellow he felt himself to be. At the right beat of the music he looked sideways at his partner with a merry and triumphant air, suddenly stamped with one foot, bounded from the floor like a ball, and flew round the room taking his partner with him. He glided silently on one foot half across the room, and seeming not to notice the chairs was dashing straight at them, when suddenly, clinking his spurs and spreading out his legs, he stopped short on his heels, stood so a second, stamped on the spot clanking his spurs, whirled rapidly round, and, striking his left heel against his right, flew round again in a circle. Natasha guessed what he meant to do, and abandoning herself to him followed his lead hardly knowing how. First he spun her round, holding her now with his left, now with his right hand, then falling on one knee he twirled her round him, and again jumping up, dashed so impetuously forward that it seemed as if he would rush through the whole suite of rooms without drawing breath, and then he suddenly stopped and performed some new and unexpected steps. When at last, smartly whirling his partner round in front of her chair, he drew up with a click of his spurs and bowed to her, Natasha did not even make him a curtsy. She fixed her eyes on him in amazement, smiling as if she did not recognize him. What does this mean? She brought out. Although Iagel did not acknowledge this to be the real mazurka, everyone was delighted with Denisov's skill. He was asked again and again as a partner, and the old men began smilingly to talk about Poland and the good old days. Denisov, flushed after the mazurka and mopping himself with his handkerchief, sat down by Natasha and did not leave her for the rest of the evening. Chapter 13. For 2 days after that Rostov did not see Dolokhov at his own or at Dolokhov's home. On the third day he received a note from him. As I do not intend to be at your house again for reasons you know of, and am going to rejoin my regiment, I am giving a farewell supper tonight to my friends. Come to the English Hotel. About 10 o'clock Rostov went to the English Hotel straight from the theater, where he had been with his family and Denisov. He was at once shown to the best room, which Dolokhov had taken for that evening. Some 20 men were gathered round a table at which Dolokhov sat between 2 candles. On the table was a pile of gold and paper money, and he was keeping the bank. Rostov had not seen him since his proposal and Sonia's refusal and felt uncomfortable at the thought of how they would meet. Dolokhov's clear, cold glance met Rostov as soon as he entered the door, as though he had long expected him. "It's a long time since we met," he said. "Thanks for coming. I'll just finish dealing, and then Ilyushka will come with his chorus." "I called once or twice at your house," said Rostov, reddening. Dolokhov made no reply. "You may punt," he said. Rostov recalled at that moment a strange conversation he had once had with Dolokhov. "None but fools trust to luck in play," Dolokhov had then said. "Or are you afraid to play with me?" Dolokhov now asked as if guessing Rostov's thought. Beneath his smile Rostov saw in him the mood he had shown at the club dinner and at other times, when as if tired of everyday life he had felt a need to escape from it by some strange, and usually cruel, action. Rostov felt ill at ease. He tried, but failed, to find some joke with which to reply to Dolokhov's words. But before he had thought of anything, Dolokhov, looking straight in his face, said slowly and deliberately so that everyone could hear. "Do you remember we had a talk about cards? He's a fool who trusts to luck, one should make certain, and I want to try." To try his luck or the certainty? Rostov asked himself. "Well, you'd better not play," Dolokhov added, and springing a new pack of cards said, "Bank, gentlemen." Moving the money forward he prepared to deal. Rostov sat down by his side and at first did not play. Dolokhov kept glancing at him. "Why don't you play?" he asked. And strange to say Nicholas felt that he could not help taking up a card, putting a small stake on it, and beginning to play. "I have no money with me," he said. "I'll trust you." Rostov staked 5 rubles on a card and lost, staked again, and again lost. Dólokhov killed, that is, beat, 10 cards of Rostov's running. "Gentlemen," said Dólokhov after he had dealt for some time. "Please place your money on the cards or I may get muddled in the reckoning." One of the players said he hoped he might be trusted. "Yes, you might, but I am afraid of getting the accounts mixed. So I ask you to put the money on your cards," replied Dólokhov. "Don't stint yourself, we'll settle afterwards," he added, turning to Rostov. The game continued, a waiter kept handing round champagne. All Rostov's cards were beaten and he had 800 rubles scored up against him. He wrote 800 rubles on a card, but while the waiter filled his glass he changed his mind and altered it to his usual stake of 20 rubles. "Leave it," said Dólokhov, though he did not seem to be even looking at Rostov, "you'll win it back all the sooner. I lose to the others but win from you. Or are you afraid of me?" he asked again. Rostov submitted. He let the 800 remain and laid down a 7 of hearts with a torn corner, which he had picked up from the floor. He well remembered that 7 afterwards. He laid down the 7 of hearts, on which with a broken bit of chalk he had written 800 rubles, in clear upright figures. He emptied the glass of warm champagne that was handed him, smiled at Dólokhov's words, and with a sinking heart, waiting for a 7 to turn up, gazed at Dólokhov's hands which held the pack. Much depended on Rostov's winning or losing on that 7 of hearts. On the previous Sunday the old count had given his son 2,000 rubles, and though he always disliked speaking of money difficulties had told Nicholas that this was all he could let him have till May, and asked him to be more economical this time. Nicholas had replied that it would be more than enough for him and that he gave his word of honor not to take anything more till the spring. Now only 1,200 rubles was left of that money, so that this 7 of hearts meant for him not only the loss of 1,600 rubles, but the necessity of going back on his word. With a sinking heart he watched Dólokhov's hands and thought, "Now then, make haste and let me have this card and I'll take my cap and drive home to supper with Denisov, Natasha, and Sonia, and will certainly never touch a card again." At that moment his home life, jokes with Petya, talks with Sonia, duets with Natasha, piquet with his father, and even his comfortable bed in the house on the Povarskia rose before him with such vividness, clearness, and charm that it seemed as if it were all a lost and unappreciated bliss, long past. He could not conceive that a stupid chance, letting the 7 be dealt to the right rather than to the left, might deprive him of all this happiness, newly appreciated and newly illumined, and plunge him into the depths of unknown and undefined misery. That could not be, yet he awaited with a sinking heart the movement of Dólokhov's hands. Those broad, reddish hands, with hairy wrists visible from under the shirt cuffs, laid down the pack and took up a glass and a pipe that were handed him. "So you are not afraid to play with me," repeated Dólokhov, and as if about to tell a good story he put down the cards, leaned back in his chair, and began deliberately with a smile. "Yes, gentlemen, I've been told there's a rumor going about Moscow that I'm a sharper, so I advise you to be careful." "Come now, deal," exclaimed Rostov. "Oh, those Moscow gossips," said Dólokhov, and he took up the cards with a smile. "Ah!" Rostov almost screamed, lifting both hands to his head. The 7 he needed was lying uppermost, the first card in the pack. He had lost more than he could pay. "Still, don't ruin yourself," said Dólokhov with a side glance at Rostov as he continued to deal. Chapter 14. An hour and a half later most of the players were but little interested in their own play. The whole interest was concentrated on Rostov. Instead of 1,600 rubles he had a long column of figures scored against him, which he had reckoned up to 10,000, but that now, as he vaguely supposed, must have risen to 15,000. In reality it already exceeded 20,000 rubles. Dólokhov was no longer listening to stories or telling them, but followed every movement of Rostov's hands and occasionally ran his eyes over the score against him. He had decided to play until that score reached 43,000. He had fixed on that number because 43 was the sum of his and Sonia's joint ages. Rostov, leaning his head on both hands, sat at the table which was scrawled over with figures, wet with spilled wine, and littered with cards. One tormenting impression did not leave him, that those broad-boned reddish hands with hairy wrists visible from under the shirt sleeves, those hands which he loved and hated, held him in their power. 600 rubles, ace, a corner, a 9, winning it back's impossible. Oh, how pleasant it was at home. The knave, double or quits, it can't be. And why is he doing this to me? Rostov pondered. Sometimes he staked a large sum, but Dólokhov refused to accept it and fixed the stake himself. Nicholas submitted to him, and at one moment prayed to God as he had done on the battlefield at the bridge over the Enns, and then guessed that the card that came first to hand from the crumpled heap under the table would save him, now counted the cords on his coat and took a card with that number and tried staking the total of his losses on it, then he looked round for aid from the other players, or peered at the now cold face of Dólokhov and tried to read what was passing in his mind. He knows of course what this loss means to me. He can't want my ruin. Wasn't he my friend? Wasn't I fond of him? But it's not his fault. What's he to do if he has such luck? And it's not my fault either, he thought to himself, I have done nothing wrong. Have I killed anyone, or insulted or wished harm to anyone? Why such a terrible misfortune? And when did it begin? Such a little while ago I came to this table with the thought of winning 100 rubles to buy that casket for Mama's name day and then going home. I was so happy, so free, so light-hearted. And I did not realize how happy I was. When did that end and when did this new, terrible state of things begin? What marked the change? I sat all the time in this same place at this table, chose and placed cards, and watched those broad-boned agile hands in the same way. When did it happen and what has happened? I am well and strong and still the same and in the same place. No, it can't be. Surely it will all end in nothing. He was flushed and bathed in perspiration, though the room was not hot. His face was terrible and piteous to see, especially from its helpless efforts to seem calm. The score against him reached the fateful sum of 43,000. Rostov had just prepared a card, by bending the corner of which he meant to double the 3,000 just put down to his score, when Dólokhov, slamming down the pack of cards, put it aside and began rapidly adding up the total of Rostov's debt, breaking the chalk as he marked the figures in his clear, bold hand. Supper, it's time for supper. And here are the gypsies. Some swarthy men and women were really entering from the cold outside and saying something in their gypsy accents. Nicholas understood that it was all over, but he said in an indifferent tone. Well, won't you go on? I had a splendid card all ready, as if it were the fun of the game which interested him most. It's all up. I'm lost, thought he. Now a bullet through my brain, that's all that's left me. And at the same time he said in a cheerful voice. Come now, just this one more little card. All right, said Dólokhov, having finished the addition. All right. 21 rubles, he said, pointing to the figure 21 by which the total exceeded the round sum of 43,000, and taking up a pack he prepared to deal. Rostov submissively unbent the corner of his card and, instead of the 6,000 he had intended, carefully wrote 21. It's all the same to me, he said. I only want to see whether you will let me win this 10, or beat it. Dólokhov began to deal seriously. Oh, how Rostov detested at that moment those hands with their short reddish fingers and hairy wrists, which held him in their power. The 10 fell to him. You owe 43,000, Count, said Dólokhov, and stretching himself he rose from the table. One does get tired sitting so long, he added. Yes, I'm tired too, said Rostov. Dólokhov cut him short, as if to remind him that it was not for him to jest. When am I to receive the money, Count? Rostov, flushing, drew Dólokhov into the next room. I cannot pay it all immediately. Will you take an IOU, he said. I say, Rostov, said Dólokhov clearly, smiling and looking Nicholas straight in the eyes, you know the saying, lucky in love, unlucky at cards. Your cousin is in love with you, I know. Oh, it's terrible to feel oneself so in this man's power, thought Rostov. He knew what a shock he would inflict on his father and mother by the news of this loss, he knew what a relief it would be to escape it all, and felt that Dólokhov knew that he could save him from all this shame and sorrow, but wanted now to play with him as a cat does with a mouse. "Your cousin," Dólokhov started to say, but Nicholas interrupted him. "My cousin has nothing to do with this, and it's not necessary to mention her," he exclaimed fiercely. "Then when am I to have it?" "Tomorrow," replied Rostov and left the room.